The very name conjures images of speed, luxury, and the roar of an engine that shakes both the ground and the soul. The prancing horse, Il Cavallino Rampante, became Italy's proudest symbol, representing cars worth millions of dollars and a global empire valued in the tens of billions. But behind that dazzling red glow lies a far darker truth. Enzo Ferrari, the man who built this empire, was not only celebrated as Il Commendatore, the commander, the genius of speed. He was also branded by newspapers with the chilling title, Il Costruttore di Morte, the Constructor of Death. During the 1952nd and 1962nd, tragedy struck again and again on the racetrack. Young, talented drivers were killed behind the wheel of cars carrying the prancing horse badge. In Italy, grieving families once marched to Ferrari's gates holding portraits of their sons, accusing Enzo of trading human lives for victories. At Monza in 1961, when a Ferrari lost control and plowed into the crowd, dozens of spectators were killed instantly. Overnight, Enzo Ferrari's name was splashed across headlines, not as a symbol of triumph, but as the face of catastrophe. What turned a man obsessed with speed into both a legend and a pariah? Was it the cold determination of a visionary leader, or the ruthless indifference of someone who valued trophies above human life? Today, Ferrari remains a dream, the pinnacle of performance and prestige. Yet if you look closer at that prancing horse, you'll see the shadows behind the shine, the blood behind the glory. And the truth about Enzo Ferrari is far darker than the world ever imagined. Part 2. Childhood and Family Background. Enzo Anselmo Ferrari was born on the 20th of February, 1898, in the small Italian town of Modena. The world he entered was one of hardship and uncertainty. His father, Alfredo, ran a modest metal workshop that barely sustained the family, while his mother, Adalgisa, struggled to keep their household in order. Enzo was not born into privilege, nor did anyone suspect he would one day reshape the history of automobiles. Childhood in Modena was unforgiving. Enzo grew up in the shadows of poverty, his family scraping together what little they had to survive. Yet, from a very young age, he found himself enchanted by the mechanical world. He often accompanied his father to the workshop, where sparks flew and the metallic rhythm of machines filled the air. To the young boy, those sounds were not noise, they were music. But life soon revealed its cruelty. In 1916, when Enzo was only 18, tragedy struck twice. Within the span of a few months, both his father and his beloved older brother, Alfredo Jr., succumbed to illness. Their deaths devastated the family. The workshop closed down, their financial security vanished, and Enzo was left adrift, carrying the weight of grief far heavier than any young man should endure. It was during these bleak days that Enzo discovered a strange kind of escape: motor racing. The sight of automobiles thundering past stirred something inside him. They represented power, speed, and control, everything his own life seemed to lack. Enzo later admitted that the loss of his father and brother shaped him into someone cold and relentless, a man who would do anything to carve his own destiny. But destiny would not come easily. His schooling was cut short. War loomed on the horizon. Like many young Italians, Enzo was drafted into the army during the First World War. He served as a mule driver in the harsh conditions of the Alpine front, witnessing death and destruction on a scale that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He returned home weakened by illness, carrying scars that were invisible yet permanent. And still, amid the devastation, one passion burned within him: the dream of racing. As a boy, he had once stood by the roadside and watched legendary drivers speed by in roaring machines, a vision so intoxicating that it became his obsession. Now, as a young man scarred by loss, he clung to that vision more fiercely than ever. This was the foundation of Enzo Ferrari, a childhood marked not by wealth or comfort, but by loss, poverty, and a hunger that could not be silenced. The boy who buried his father and brother would grow into a man determined to conquer death itself through speed. What he did not yet know was that death would follow him, stalking every triumph and eventually shaping his legacy as much as his victories ever could. Part 3. Early Struggles and Failures. When Enzo Ferrari returned from the war in 1918, Italy was a country in ruins. Jobs were scarce, poverty widespread, and dreams often crushed beneath the weight of survival. For a young man who had lost nearly everything, there seemed little hope of a future. Yet Enzo carried with him an obsession the world of automobiles. His first attempt to break into the industry was humble. He managed to secure a job as a test driver for a small car manufacturer in Milan, a role that paid little but kept him close to the machines he adored. Each day he risked his life pushing unproven vehicles to their limits on rough Italian roads. But for Enzo, the danger was irrelevant. What mattered was that he was finally behind the wheel. In 1919, he entered his very first race, the Parma Poggio di Berceto hill climb. Driving a tiny CMN car, he was far from victory, finishing in the middle of the pack. But he had tasted the thrill, and that taste would never leave him. Soon after, he competed in the Targa Florio, one of the most brutal and prestigious races in Europe. He finished ninth, a respectable result for a newcomer, but hardly the kind of glory he sought. Behind the scenes, however, reality was harsh. Racing was expensive. Cars needed constant repairs. Parts were scarce, and sponsors were hard to find. Enzo's pockets were empty, and more than once he considered giving up the dream. He often relied on the generosity of friends, mechanics, and small backers just to keep his engine running. Each setback reminded him that while speed thrilled him, survival was another matter entirely. Still, perseverance defined Enzo Ferrari. His determination caught the attention of Alfa Romeo, Italy's premier car manufacturer. In 1920, he joined their racing team as a driver. It seemed like the breakthrough he had longed for. He drove powerful Alfa machines across Europe, competing against some of the world's best. He achieved modest successes, a second place at the Targa Florio in 1920, several solid finishes elsewhere. But he was no Tazio Nuvolari, no great champion. Enzo himself knew it. He lacked the raw speed of the greatest drivers. And then came his first great humiliation. At the height of his driving career, Enzo froze during a major race. Overcome with nerves and mechanical failure, he failed to perform and withdrew. For a man who prided himself on control, this was devastating. He realized that while he loved cars and racing, his true strength was not behind the wheel but in the garage as an organizer, a leader, and a visionary. In 1931, Enzo retired from competitive driving. It was not the glorious career he had imagined as a boy. There were no championships, no world records, no lasting fame as a driver. Instead, there were failures, financial struggles, and moments of deep self-doubt. But failure, as Enzo often said later, was a teacher. Out of his frustration grew a new determination. If he could not be the fastest driver, he would build the fastest team. He poured his energy into managing Scuderia Ferrari, which he founded in 1929 as a racing stable for Alfa Romeo cars. At first, it was little more than a private club for gentlemen racers. Money was scarce, victories rare, and survival uncertain. Many doubted he would last. Yet, even in these early years, Enzo's philosophy emerged. Racing was war, and only the ruthless would survive. He demanded loyalty, sacrifice, and absolute commitment from his drivers and mechanics. Some admired him, others feared him, but none could deny his obsession. The man who had once been just another struggling driver was beginning to reinvent himself. Through failure, Enzo Ferrari found his true calling not as the one holding the steering wheel, but as the commander orchestrating victory from the shadows. What he could not yet foresee was that his obsession with speed would demand a cost far greater than money or pride. The price, in the years to come, would often be measured in human lives. Part 4, Breakthrough and Rise. By the late 1932nd, Enzo Ferrari had already learned that destiny rarely unfolds in a straight line. His Scuderia Ferrari, founded in 1929, had grown into a formidable racing stable for Alfa Romeo machines, but it was far from secure. Money was always short, and every season felt like a gamble with survival. Still, Enzo's relentless drive kept the dream alive. But war was on the horizon. In 1938, under pressure from the fascist regime, Alfa Romeo absorbed Enzo's team, making him head of their racing department. For a man who had long cherished independence, it was a bitter pill. Within a year, frustrated and constrained, he walked away. He was forbidden from using the Ferrari name for at least 4 years, a clause meant to cripple his ambitions. Yet Enzo was nothing if not resourceful. In 1939, he founded a new company in Modena under the name Autoavio Costruzioni. Outwardly, it built machine tools for the war effort. Secretly, Enzo's team continued to tinker with racing cars, laying the groundwork for what would one day bear his name. In 1940, they produced the 815, considered the first Ferrari-designed car, though it competed under a different banner. Then, the war engulfed Europe, halting everything. Ferrari's workshop was bombed, forcing Enzo to relocate to Maranello, a small town that would become the heart of his empire. There, amid the ruins of war, Enzo's vision sharpened. He wasn't just going to return to racing, he was going to create his own mark, his own identity, separate from Alfa Romeo or anyone else. The post-war years were a period of chaos for Italy, but also of opportunity. In 1947, Enzo Ferrari unveiled the car that would change everything, the 125S, the very first car to bear the Ferrari name. Sleek, red, powered by a 1.5-liter V12 engine designed by Gioacchino Colombo, it embodied Enzo's philosophy, speed above all. The car won its very first race at the Rome Grand Prix in May of that year. The prancing horse was no longer just a symbol, it was a declaration. From that moment, Ferrari grew at a breathtaking pace. Throughout the 1,952nd, Ferrari cars dominated endurance racing and Formula One. The Marque collected victories at Le Mans, the Mille Miglia, and countless Grand Prix. Drivers like Alberto Ascari, Juan Manuel Fangio, and Mike Hawthorne piloted Ferraris to glory, cementing the brand's reputation as the pinnacle of motorsport. Enzo, who had once been a middling driver, now commanded the most feared and respected team in the world. But Ferrari's ambition stretched beyond the racetrack. Enzo understood that the glory of racing could fuel a business empire. Wealthy industrialists, Hollywood actors, and royalty flocked to Maranello to buy his road cars. Models like the 166 Inter and later the 250 GT combined breathtaking performance with Italian elegance, becoming status symbols for the elite. Owning a Ferrari was no longer just about transportation, it was about prestige, power, and desire. By the mid-1952nd, Ferrari had achieved what once seemed impossible. He had built both a racing dynasty and a luxury brand, but success never softened Enzo. He remained a cold, commanding figure, rarely smiling, often distant, and always demanding. He was a man who thrived on control, orchestrating his company with an iron will. His drivers called him Il Commendatore, the commander. His employees both feared and revered him. For Enzo Ferrari, racing was not sport, it was war. And like any war, it demanded sacrifices. He pushed his team to the edge, demanded absolute loyalty, and treated every failure as betrayal. Victories brought him satisfaction, but never joy. Losses, especially when they involved human lives, he carried with the stoic silence of a general. The world admired Ferrari cars, but few understood the toll behind them. For every win at Monza or Le Mans, there were crashes, injuries, and tragedies. Enzo rarely attended funerals, yet he was haunted by the deaths of his drivers. He would later confess that each loss left a permanent scar, though his public face revealed nothing. Still, Ferrari pressed on, convinced that his cars must always be faster, more powerful, more daring. Customers demanded speed, sponsors demanded results. The legend of Ferrari demanded blood. By the end of the 1952nd, Ferrari was not just a brand, it was a myth, a fusion of brilliance, beauty, and danger. The boy from Modena who once chased cars down dusty roads had risen to create one of the most iconic names in history. But his rise was not free. It was built on risk, obsession, and a willingness to gamble with lives. And in the years ahead, those gambles would unleash tragedies so devastating that they would forever link the name Ferrari not only to speed, but to death. Part 5. Dark Side, Tragedy, and Controversies. By the late 1952nd, Ferrari was on top of the world. His cars were winning races, his brand was becoming synonymous with speed and prestige, and the prancing horse symbol carried an aura of invincibility. But with every lap his cars completed, danger lurked just inches away. And when tragedy struck, it struck hard. In 1955, motorsport endured its darkest day at the Le Mans disaster. Although Ferrari was not directly responsible, the event cast a long shadow over all of racing. A Mercedes car flew into the crowd, killing more than 80 spectators. Public outrage erupted across Europe, and calls to ban racing grew louder. For Enzo Ferrari, it was a chilling reminder of how thin the line was between spectacle and catastrophe. Just 6 years later, disaster hit much closer to home. At the 1961 Italian Grand Prix at Monza, Ferrari star driver Wolfgang von Trips lost control of his car during a high-speed battle. His Ferrari veered into the crowd, killing the driver instantly and taking the lives of more than a dozen spectators. It was one of the most horrifying scenes in Formula One history. In newspapers the next day, Enzo Ferrari's face was splashed alongside the grim headline, "The Constructor of Death." It was not the last time. Through the 1952nd and 1962nd, Ferrari drivers died with disturbing frequency. Eugenio Castellotti, Alfonso de Portago, Luigi Musso, Peter Collins, Lorenzo Bandini, each death stained the legend with fresh blood. Journalists and grieving families accused Enzo of caring more about victory than human life. Some even marched to the gates of Maranello holding pictures of their lost sons, demanding answers from the man they believed had sent them to their deaths. Enzo rarely responded. He almost never attended funerals, maintaining the cold exterior of a commander who could not afford to show weakness. Yet those close to him later revealed that each loss left him devastated in private. He bore the grief in silence, a man torn between his love of racing and the price it demanded. But tragedy did not only come from the racetrack. In 1956, Enzo suffered the most personal loss of all, the death of his beloved son, Alfredo Dino Ferrari. Dino had been Enzo's pride, a bright young engineer who shared his father's passion for automobiles. But at just 24 years old, Dino succumbed to muscular dystrophy, a cruel illness that left Enzo powerless to save him. The loss broke him. For the rest of his life, Enzo wore only black, as though in permanent mourning. In memory of his son, Ferrari introduced the Dino line of cars, smaller and more affordable than the flagship V12 Second, a tribute to the boy who would never see his father's empire reach its full height. Yet for Enzo, the gesture could not fill the void. Dino's death compounded the weight of all the drivers who had perished under his command. The man once obsessed with speed now carried the ghosts of dozens of young men and his own son in his shadow. Controversy also followed Ferrari outside the track. His ruthless management style earned him enemies. He demanded absolute loyalty from his staff and tolerated no dissent. In the early 1962nd, half of his top engineers walked out in protest, a scandal known as the Great Walkout of Ferrari. Rivals whispered that Enzo ruled not as a leader but as a tyrant. Still, nothing stained his reputation as much as the blood on the racetrack. Italian courts even investigated Ferrari for manslaughter after several fatal accidents, though he was never convicted. To many, he remained a symbol of both brilliance and cruelty, the man who gave the world speed but asked lives in return. By the late 1962nd, Ferrari was both legend and villain. His cars were faster, sleeker, and more desirable than ever. Yet for every victory lap, there was another gravestone. The world loved Ferrari, but it could never fully ignore the cost. And for Enzo himself, the weight of that cost never truly left. Behind his dark sunglasses and stern expression, he carried the grief of a man who had built an empire out of speed and paid for it in blood. Part 6, Legacy, Present Day. Enzo Ferrari remained at the helm of his company until his final days. Hidden behind his dark glasses and rarely seen outside Maranello, he became more myth than man, a figure shrouded in both reverence and fear. When he died in August 1988, at the age of 90, Italy mourned the passing of one of its most influential sons. Heads of state, racing legends, and ordinary fans alike paid tribute. For many, it felt as if the heart of Italian motorsport had stopped beating. Yet Enzo's legacy lives on in every scarlet Ferrari that roars down a track or glides through city streets. Ferrari today is one of the most prestigious brands in the world, valued in the tens of billions. Its cars owned by royalty, celebrities, and enthusiasts across the globe. On the Formula One circuit, the Scuderia remains the most successful team in history, carrying a legacy of triumphs that began with Enzo's relentless obsession. But that legacy is complicated. Alongside the victories are the tragedies, the young men who never made it home, the families who cursed the name Ferrari even as others adored it. Enzo never escaped the accusations of ruthlessness, nor the haunting image of being the Constructor of Death. To this day, debates continue. Was he a visionary who accepted risk as the price of progress, or a cold leader who placed glory above human life? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Enzo Ferrari embodied both brilliance and darkness. He turned a small workshop in Modena into a global icon, but in doing so, he carried blood on his hands. He built cars that defined speed, elegance, and desire, yet those same machines became instruments of tragedy. What remains undeniable is the power of the symbol he left behind. The prancing horse is more than a logo. It is a reminder of human ambition at its most intoxicating and dangerous. It stands for the pursuit of perfection, for dreams realized at impossible speeds, but also for the heavy price of chasing glory too far. Enzo Ferrari's story is not just about racing or cars. It is about the fine line between vision and obsession, between triumph and tragedy. The man who made the world's most desired machines left behind a legacy admired by millions, but shadowed by ghosts that will never be forgotten. And so, every time a Ferrari engine screams across the asphalt, it carries not only the echo of victory, but the whispers of the lives lost to make it possible.